They said no land worth owning ever came cheap. But when a broke cowboy named Calder Reed bought a forgotten ranch in the red deserts of New Mexico for just 50 cents, he thought he was getting a miracle or a mistake. What he didn't expect was the thunder of hooves inside the house and a colossal gray stallion staring at him from the shadows. Some say the ranch was cursed. Others say it was haunted. But Calder would soon learn the truth. The land wasn't empty. It was guarding a secret powerful enough to kill for. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. Calder Reed was 29 years old and already carried the weariness of a man twice his age. He'd spent the last 10 years drifting through the backcountry of the American West, Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, taking whatever work came his way. Horse breaking, fence mending, branding season, long hard weeks that started before sunrise and ended after the stars came out. He'd slept in bunkhouses that smelled of sweat and hay, eaten meals that were more beans than beef, and saved every dollar he could scrape together. The pay was small, the winters brutal, and the men he worked with rough as saddle leather. But through all those dusty miles, Calder held on to one dream, a patch of land that would finally be his. There was a quiet steadiness about him, the kind that came from too many failures and too much road behind. He wasn't bitter, just tired. The kind of tired that sits in a man's bones until something luck, fate, or sheer desperation shakes it loose. That spring, his wallet held a few $100s and a single weathered coin, a 50-cent piece his father had given him before he died. "Someday you'll trade this for something that lasts," his father had said. Calder never figured the old man meant it literally. But fate had a cruel sense of humor. It was late afternoon when Calder pulled into a roadside diner on the outskirts of Santa Fe. The wind was blowing hard off the desert, lifting dust into thin golden sheets that clung to the windows. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and fry oil. The radio behind the counter murmured through a farm report, wheat prices, rainfall, another drought creeping up from Texas. Calder sat at the counter, hat tilted low, and ordered a cup of black coffee. Beside the napkin dispenser lay an old, week-worn copy of the Santa Fe Gazette. He flipped through it absently while waiting for his food classifieds, obituaries, auction notices, the same desperate poetry of ranch life. Then something caught his eye. A tiny ad wedged between listings for farm trucks and hay balers. The print was faded, but the words were sharp enough to change everything. Abandoned ranch for sale. Dorn Mesa Ranch, 160 acres. Price 50 cents. No realtor. Cash only. Calder blinked, then laughed out loud. 50 cents, he muttered, shaking his head. Hell, can't even buy a cup of coffee for that. But when he looked again, slower this time, the laughter died. The number was real. So was the phone line at the bottom of the ad. He took a sip of coffee and stared at the words until they stopped being funny. A $50 ranch. Either the deal of a lifetime or a very bad joke. That night, he sat in the cab of his pickup under a motel sign flickering in the wind, turning the 50-cent coin over in his fingers. The coin was old, a 1946. Franklin $50, its edges worn smooth, the eagle on the back almost rubbed away. He'd carried it for years, a reminder of his father and the promise that someday he'd stop drifting. Could be a scam, he said to no one. Could be the last chance I'll ever get. He looked at his saddle lying in the bed of the truck, cracked and faded from a decade of work. By morning, he'd decided. He sold the saddle at a tack shop near the highway, added the cash to his dwindling savings, and asked the clerk to trade him a crisp 50-cent bill, not because he had to, but because it felt right. A proper bargain deserved proper currency. He stepped outside, coin warm in his palm, and dialed the number printed in the ad. The line clicked after 2 rings. A woman's voice came through, young, nervous, trying to sound composed. "Hello, this is Calder Reed," he said. "I'm calling about the Dorn Mesa Ranch." Silence on the line, then the sound of a shaky exhale. "If you're serious," she said, "the price still stands. 50 cents. We just need someone to take ownership. No negotiations, no paperwork delays." "That's not how land deals usually work," he said evenly. "So why sell it for less than a cup of coffee?" The woman hesitated. "My name's Mara Langford. The property belonged to my uncle Silas Dorn. He passed away 3 weeks ago." "Sorry to hear that." "Thanks," she said softly. "They called it an accident. He fell off the porch one night. But none of us believe that's what happened." Her tone changed, quieter, like she was confessing something she shouldn't. The last few years, Uncle Silas wasn't himself. He kept saying people were watching him. He started keeping notes, taking photos, going out into the desert at night. Everyone thought he was losing his mind. Calder listened without interrupting. He'd known plenty of old ranchers who saw ghosts in the dust. But there was something in Mara's voice that didn't sound like superstition. It sounded like fear. "If you go out there," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, "go during the day." He said the place was never really empty. Calder sat in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "Send me the papers and the address." "You'll take it?" she asked. "I'll take it," he said. "Whatever comes with it." The next morning, a courier delivered a brown envelope to the motel. Inside was a hand-drawn map, a single-page deed of transfer, and an old brass key stained with rust. Attached was a note in neat handwriting: "Property sold as is. No guarantees, no returns." Calder signed the papers, sealed them back in the envelope, along with the crisp 50-cent bill, and wrote on the corner in black ink, "I'll take it. Whatever comes with it." By noon, he'd loaded his pickup with the few things he owned: a duffel bag, a thermos of coffee, a bedroll, and a short hunting rifle that had more sentimental value than use. He fueled up, tipped his hat to the cashier, and turned the truck south toward the red desert. The road out of Santa Fe was a ribbon of silence. Route 84 cut through ghost towns where the wind rattled tin roofs and the sun baked old motel signs into oblivion. Calder drove with the windows down, letting the desert air fill the cab, hot, dry, and laced with sage. He thought about Mara's warning, never really empty. Maybe it was nonsense, maybe not. Every abandoned ranch had its story. Some ended with foreclosure, others with blood. The sun sank lower as he crossed the county line into San Cielo. The land began to rise in flat shelves of red rock, the kind locals called mesas, ancient seafloors turned to stone. In the distance, a narrow ridge caught the dying light, glowing orange against a violet sky. He checked the map. Scrawled in pencil just beneath a winding dirt road were 5 words, "home," until it wasn't. Calder traced the line with his finger, a slow grin forming despite himself. 50 cents for a whole ranch, he said quietly. Either a blessing or a warning. The truck rolled on through the twilight. Behind him, Santa Fe disappeared into the horizon. Ahead, the mesa waited silent, red, and watching. The road to San Cielo stretched for what felt like forever. A narrow ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through a sea of red dust and sandstone towers. Calder had been driving for almost a full day and night, sleeping only in short bursts at rest stops that smelled of sun-baked metal and sagebrush. Every town he passed was more ghost than living, peeling signs, shuttered gas stations, an occasional tumbleweed rolling through the main street like it was the last soul left to wander. The farther south he went, the more the land bled into red. The soil darkened from copper to rust, the mesas rising higher, their faces carved by centuries of wind. His radio crackled in and out of static, the faint voice of a weather station fading beneath the rhythmic thud of tires and the rattle of a loose hinge in the truck bed. When the signal finally died altogether, only the wind remained endless, whispering restless. In the distance, the mesas flattened like the surface of a great red table. That he knew from the map was Dorn Mesa. The line of the property was marked with a pencil note in the margin. Property line ends here. BLM land beyond. Federal wilderness surrounded it, miles of government land, where herds of mustangs were said to still roam. As the sun slid toward the horizon, the light turned molten gold, painting the rocks in hues of copper and blood. When his dashboard clock struck 5, Calder saw the gate a crooked outline of metal against the fading sky. The gate was a skeleton of iron and rust. Its hinges groaned in the wind, and the once bold sign that read Dorn Mesa Ranch was now little more than flaking paint, half the letters gone, the rest hanging like broken teeth. A padlock dangled loosely from the chain, and every time the breeze passed through it, clinked like a warning bell. Calder shut off the engine and stepped out. The air was dry enough to sting the throat. No birds, no insects, no distant hum of cattle. Only silence vast and ancient, as if the land itself were holding its breath. He ran a hand along the rusted metal, feeling the coarse grit of years. Somewhere beyond that gate, a man had died, and a family had refused to come back. Mara's words came to him again, "If you go, go during the day." He took the key from his pocket, the one she'd mailed him with the deed. It was rough and pitted with rust edges sharp enough to bite. When he turned it in the padlock, the sound check cracked through the silence like a rifle shot. The wind paused, almost listening. Calder pushed the gate open. It swung wide with a drawn-out groan, and as his truck rolled forward, the red dust rose in a swirling curtain around him, like the land itself exhaling after years of stillness. The dirt road wound through dry grass and scattered rocks, the remnants of fence posts leaning like weary sentinels. To the left stood what was once a horse barn, long, low, and leaning its roof half-collapsed, the doors hanging crooked. To the right, a solitary cabin waited small against the vastness, its wood weathered to a color between silver and ash. Every window was shuttered tight curtains drawn behind them. The air smelled of metal old straw and the faint trace of something burned long ago. When Calder stepped from the truck, the ground crunched under his boots, a brittle hollow sound. He knelt, brushed at the dirt, and found what he hadn't expected: hoof prints. Not old, not blown over by dust. Fresh. He straightened, scanning the horizon. No movement. No tracks of a trailer or a vehicle. Just those deep, sharp impressions leading toward the house. "So much for abandoned," he muttered. The wind lifted, carrying a low moan through the torn siding of the barn. It almost sounded like breathing. The front door was ajar. Calder hesitated on the porch, feeling the boards creak beneath his weight. He reached out, pushed. The hinges shrieked softly, a voice too human for comfort. The smell hit first stale dust, wood rot, the sour tang of moisture trapped too long. Inside, the air was thick, heavy with years of neglect. Light spilled through a crack in the roof, a single golden shaft cutting across the floor like a blade. The living room stretched wide and empty. Furniture sat draped in ghostly sheets, their shapes outlined beneath the dust. A stone fireplace sagged under its own weight, and on the mantel a row of framed photographs leaned sideways, glass clouded with grime. On a table nearby, a single glass still held the ring of old water, as if someone had set it down only days ago. The curtains were drawn tight, muting the light to a dull amber glow. Every step Calder took sent a tremor through the floorboards, each creak echoing off the walls like the whisper of a memory. He paused, letting his eyes adjust. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Then came the sound. A deep, deliberate thud. Thunk. Thunk. Thunk, heavy and measured like the weight of hooves on wood. Calder froze. At first, it was only a shadow. A moving darkness at the end of the hallway where the light didn't reach. He felt the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Another sound, the slow exhale of something large. And then it stepped forward. The creature that emerged was too real to be imagination. A stallion, massive and wild, his coat the color of burnished steel. 17 hands, tall at least, muscles rippling under skin that shimmered like liquid metal. His mane hung long and tangled, streaked with dust and desert burrs. Each breath from his flared nostrils came out as pale vapor, though the air was warm. The stallion's eyes caught the thin shaft of light and burned gold, not bright, but molten like something alive beneath the surface. He took another step, hooves striking the floor with quiet authority. The ground seemed to hum under the weight. Calder's hand twitched toward the revolver at his hip and then stopped. The horse wasn't charging, wasn't afraid. It was studying him. A wild Mustang that should have bolted at the first human scent, standing calm inside a house where no horse should ever be. Easy Boy, Calder whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm not here to take anything from you. The stallion flicked his ears forward, listening. For a heartbeat, the two just stared at each other, man and animal, both out of place, both uncertain who belonged here more. Then with a slow breath, the horse turned. He stepped back into the hallway, hooves striking once, twice, 3 times. At the doorway to the last room, he paused, turned his head, and looked back. The gold in his eyes caught the light again, sharp and deliberate, not fear, not threat. An invitation. Calder didn't move for a long time. His heart hammered against his ribs, the silence around him thick enough to taste. The revolver stayed in its holster. He knew instinctively that drawing it would be the wrong kind of language here. He exhaled slow and steady, listening to the wind whisper through the gaps in the roof. Dust drifted down from the rafters, swirling in the thin sunlight. When it settled, he saw them, a trail of fresh hoof prints pressed deep into the layer of dust, leading straight down the hallway to the final door. He crouched, touching one print lightly. Warm. Whatever this horse was, it hadn't wandered in by accident. No wild animal stayed inside a house, not without a reason. And this one somehow seemed to have one. Calder straightened, the air thick in his lungs. He tightened his grip on the flashlight, clipped to his belt, and looked down the hall. All right, he murmured. If you want me to see, I'll see. His boots creaked softly as he started forward, one step at a time. Each sound echoed distant and hollow. The light from the roof beam shifted with him, painting his shadow long across the walls. The door at the end of the hallway was half closed, and the air behind it carrying a strange mix of old wood, metal, and the papery dryness of dust. Calder hesitated for a heartbeat, then pushed it open. The hinges groaned softly, releasing a draft of stale air that smelled like time itself. A single window, small, high, and narrow, let in a ribbon of weak light. It cut across the room and landed on the walls, and that was when Calder saw them. Every inch of space was covered in photographs, maps, and handwritten notes, the layers stacked and overlapping like a mind that refused to rest. Iron Ghost stood motionless on the wooden floor, head lowered, his gray coat catching what little light there was. The stallion's breathing was slow, calm, almost ceremonial, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. The room felt heavy, not with dust, but with the weight of obsession. It was the kind of space a man built when he no longer trusted anyone, not even himself. Calder stepped closer, careful not to disturb the order of things. It felt wrong to move too quickly here, as if the air itself might shatter. Every step forward was like walking into someone else's memory, a memory that wasn't finished living yet. The four walls told a story more clearly than words ever could. Hundreds of photographs pinned edge-to-edge wild horses across the mesas and grasslands of San Cielo County. Each photo bore notes scrawled in black ink, coat colors, scar patterns, numbers, locations. Half of them were stamped in red marker, the same word written again and again, missing. Between the horse photos were others, grainy night shots of trucks under floodlights, men dragging ropes, makeshift corrals lit by headlamps. The pictures had been taken from a distance, zoomed and shaky, but clear enough to show what they were organized roundups. Not BLM work, not government-sanctioned culls. These were thefts. One wall was dominated by a large county map marked with red pins, connected by threads that formed a spiderweb of crimes. Each line linked to a note, each note a date. March 11th. Herd moved north. Same truck as before. Plates swapped again. Calder stared, feeling a chill crawl up his spine. This wasn't the scattered work of a paranoid old man. It was the meticulous documentation of an investigator. Someone who had spent years tracking an operation that nobody wanted to see. Someone who'd known the truth would one day need proof to defend itself. Iron Ghost snorted softly, tapping his hoof once against the floorboards. Calder looked at him and nodded. "Yeah," he murmured. He knew exactly what he was doing. A desk stood in the center of the room, sturdy but worn smooth by years of use. On it lay a thick leather notebook. Its spine cracked its edges, yellowed from sweat and sun. Calder brushed the dust from its cover and opened it carefully. The handwriting inside was firm slanted, not the shaky scrawl of a man losing his grip. It began with lists of sightings, then times, then patterns, dates of missing herds, coordinates, weather conditions. Halfway through, the tone changed. The notes became urgent. They come after midnight. Fake plates, 15 to 20 horses per run. Fast, organized. Locals know. Sheriffs silent. Page after page chronicled a secret war fought in the shadows trucks that appeared like ghosts, herds, that vanished overnight, witnesses who changed their stories. Calder flipped through, stopping when he saw red lines drawn around one paragraph. "If I disappear, look for the man with the badge." The words were underlined twice, the ink pressed hard enough to dent the paper. He exhaled slowly, feeling the back of his neck prickle. The silence of the house pressed tighter around him, as if even the walls didn't want to hear what came next. The dead were speaking, and he was the only one left to listen. He turned another page. Part of it was torn, others smeared with what looked like rainwater or maybe tears. In the margin, a note scribbled sideways read, "The herd never came back. Ghost horse survived. Intelligent eyes follows me now." Calder looked up. Iron Ghost was watching him from across the room, those molten gold eyes reflecting the lamplight like mirrors. "Guess I'm meeting an old friend of yours," Calder murmured. On the far corner of the desk sat a half-open envelope, the paper inside yellowed but still crisp. Across the top, stamped in official black ink, it read, U.S. Department of the Interior, Wildlife Crimes Division. Calder unfolded the letter carefully. The typewritten lines were formal, methodical, Silas Dorn's original report. He detailed everything: the trucks, the fake registration numbers, the disappearing herds, and the growing suspicion that someone in law enforcement was involved. The second sheet clipped to it carried the federal response, neat, cold, bureaucratic, referred to Sheriff Dale Huxley, San Cielo County, for verification and report. Calder's pulse quickened. He knew the name. He'd seen it on the badge of the man who ruled these empty miles. Beneath the letters, scrawled in blue pen, a different hand, a heavier pressure, was a single line: Huxley knows. I'm next. Calder stared at the handwriting until it blurred. His throat went dry. The timestamp in the corner read just 10 days before Silas Dorn fell off his porch. The coincidence was too perfect, too clean. A man reports a crime, the report gets sent to the very person he accused, and 10 days later, the witness is dead. Not an accident, not a mystery, a message. He set the papers down gently, as if afraid to wake the ghost that lived inside them. Iron Ghost shifted his weight, the floor creaking beneath his hooves. Calder looked at him again, really looked this time, and saw what he'd missed before. In one corner of the room stood an old water trough, half empty, its metal rim rusted but still damp. Beside it, a pile of hay, long since turned gray with dust. He crouched, ran a hand along the boards near the trough. The hoof prints pressed into the wood matched the ones he'd seen in the hallway. Silas hadn't just brought the horse inside to study him. He'd kept him here, protected him, hidden him from whoever was hunting the wild herds. Slowly, the pieces began to fall into place. Silas Dorn had uncovered an organized ring stealing wild mustangs off federal land, and when he'd gone to the authorities, the sheriff himself had buried the report. Then Silas had died, and the one witness left behind wasn't human at all. Iron Ghost had stayed, guarding the evidence, guarding the memory of the man who saved him. Calder whispered, "He saved you, and you stayed to guard him." The stallion lowered his head, exhaling softly through his nostrils, a sound that felt almost like a sigh. It was the first time Calder had seen an animal look sad. No, not sad. Loyal. The kind of loyalty that doesn't die when the master does. Calder sat down heavily in the chair behind the desk, Silas's chair. The wood creaked under his weight, and dust motes floated in the air like tiny ghosts. Outside, the wind pressed against the walls, a hollow moan passing through the cracks. But in here, the silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was waiting. He closed the notebook and gathered the papers into a neat stack, sliding them into his canvas pack. His hands were steady now. There was no room for disbelief anymore. He turned to Iron Ghost, who still stood in the half-light golden eyes, steady and unblinking. Somehow, Calder felt as if the horse already knew what he was thinking. That the man Silas Dorn had been waiting for, the one to finish what he'd started, had finally arrived. He rose from the chair and tightened the straps on his pack. The air smelled of old paper and truth. He glanced once more at the walls, at the hundreds of pinned faces of wild horses, now lost at the red threads stretching across the map like veins. Whatever killed him, Calder said quietly, won't bury this. Iron Ghost flicked an ear, nostrils flaring as if in approval. Calder stepped toward the door. Behind him, the photographs rustled in the faint breeze that had slipped through the broken window. It almost sounded like applause. When he crossed the threshold, he felt the weight of the place settle on his shoulders, not as a curse, but as inheritance. He had come here to buy a dead man's land for 50 cents. Instead, he had bought himself a war. And somewhere deep in the walls of that lonely ranch, the legacy of Silas Dorn waited for him to finish what had begun. The next morning, dawn broke over Dorn Mesa, like a quiet promise. Calder stood on the porch of the old wooden house, staring across the red earth and the collapsed fences that zigzagged toward the horizon. The air was sharp and still carrying the faint scent of dust and sage. He knew what common sense would say to pack his things, lock the door, and drive away before the same fate that met Silas Dorn came for him. But he also knew he couldn't. The moment he'd stepped into that back room, seen the photographs, the maps, the warnings, the truth had sunk its claws into him. Leaving would mean letting the silence win again. His decision was simple: stay, keep his head down, and act like nothing was out of the ordinary. If anyone asked, that he was just another drifter with a 50-cent ranch and too much time on his hands. He started by fixing what could be fixed. He patched the roof where the wind had chewed through the boards, rebuilt the gate, burned the trash that had piled up behind the barn. He cleaned the windows so the light could reach inside again. They were small acts, ordinary acts, but they gave the house a heartbeat again. That evening, as the sun bled into the mesas, he caught sight of Iron Ghost standing on the ridge above the ranch. The stallion's coat shimmered like smoke in the dying light. He didn't move, didn't come closer, just watched. And for the first time since he arrived, Calder didn't feel alone. The days passed in a kind of quiet rhythm, steady as the ticking of an old clock. Calder woke with the dawn-brewed coffee, black and strong, and walked the property line before the heat rose. He mended fences, cleared brush, checked the water in the old well. When the work was done, he wrote in his journal short notes, small details, tracks near East Ridge. No sign of vehicles. Ghost returned before midnight. He didn't try to approach the stallion. He understood trust couldn't be taken. It had to be earned. So he left the horse to come and go as he pleased. Each morning, Iron Ghost would vanish into the wide plains, a streak of steel against the sunlit dust. Each evening, he would return, circling the house in silence, before lying down near the porch, half in shadow, half in moonlight, like a sentinel keeping watch. Once, while Calder was hauling planks across the yard, the stallion came close enough that Calder could hear the sound of his breathing, heavy, warm, steady. He didn't flinch. Neither did the horse. "You don't owe me trust, boy," Calder said softly. "I'll earn it." Iron Ghost flicked his tail, turned his head slightly, not away, not toward, just enough to show he'd heard. The wind moved between them, carrying dust and the faint smell of rain. On the 6th morning, Calder stepped outside to find the horse waiting. Iron Ghost stood squarely in front of the house, hooves planted head high, his breath visible in the cold air. He snorted once, pawed the ground, then turned and started walking toward the southern ridge. Calder grabbed his hat and followed, keeping a respectful distance. The horse didn't look back, but slowed enough for him to keep up. They moved through knee-high grass and scattered stones until Iron Ghost stopped at a patch of freshly disturbed earth. Something metallic glinted beneath the dirt. Calder crouched, brushed away the top layer of soil, and found the corner of a small steel box. He fetched a shovel from the truck, unearthed it carefully, and pried it open. Inside were files, photographs, and 2 memory cards, labeled in Silas Dorn's careful handwriting, Backup 1, Backup 2. Tucked on top was a single scrap of paper, the ink smudged but legible in case they find me first. Calder's throat tightened. He looked up. Iron Ghost stood a few feet away. Ears pricked forward, watching him. "You kept his secrets safe," Calder murmured. He carried the box back to the house and spent the afternoon copying every file onto his old laptop. Each folder was a continuation of Silas's investigation photos, logs, coordinates, license plates, names. The truth was alive again, pulled from the ground by a horse that refused to forget. The next day, while Calder was repairing a section of fence near the northern ridge, Iron Ghost appeared again. He let out a low rumble, almost like a warning, and began trotting toward a narrow path between the rocks. Calder wiped the sweat from his brow, slung his camera over his shoulder, and followed. The trail wound upward, weaving between slabs of sandstone that gleamed red and gold in the sun. Each hoofprint the stallion left behind was clear, deliberate, a guide through the labyrinth of stone. They climbed for nearly an hour until the land narrowed to a crack between two cliffs. From within came the faint sound of running water. Iron Ghost ducked his head and stepped through the gap. Calder followed, crouching beneath a low overhang, and stopped dead. Beyond the rocks lay a hidden canyon, green as an oasis in a land that had forgotten color. A narrow stream wound through the grass, fed by an underground spring. Wildflowers clung to the edges of the water, and sunlight poured in from a break high above, turning everything gold. In the center of the clearing, a herd of mustangs grazed peacefully, a dozen, maybe more, their coats shining in the afternoon light. Two foals chased each other through the shallows, their laughter like whinnies echoing off the canyon walls. Calder stood motionless, overcome. This was no accident. This was sanctuary. The signs of Silas Dorn were everywhere. A hand-built fence along the waterline, half collapsed, but sturdy enough to show human craft. A feed trough fashioned from an old oil drum. A small wooden shed leaning against the rocks, its door hanging open, revealing a few rusted tools and a lantern long gone cold. At the edge of the meadow, half buried in grass, lay a wooden sign bleached by the sun. Calder brushed the dirt away and read the carved letters, faint but still there. Ghost Hollow. He straightened slowly, eyes searching the canyon as realization settled in. This was where Silas had brought the horses he rescued, a hidden refuge beyond the reach of thieves and corrupt lawmen. A secret patch of freedom carved into the desert. Iron Ghost had returned home. He stepped into the meadow unhurried, and the herd lifted their heads to greet him. Not one flinched. Not one ran. They knew him. He was one of them, their leader, their ghost. Calder's chest tightened as he watched the stallion move among them, gentle but commanding. For a moment, he imagined Silas standing where he stood, now smiling in quiet pride. The thought brought a strange warmth, something between grief and peace. He whispered, "I'll keep them safe, old man. You and your ghost." The wind rose through the canyon, passing through the rocks, with a sigh that sounded almost like laughter. By the time Calder returned to Dorn Mesa, dusk had swallowed the sky. The air was cooling fast, and the first stars shimmered faintly above the ridge. Iron Ghost walked beside him the whole way. No rope, no command, just steady companionship. Their shadows stretched long across the red ground, side by side, until the light faded entirely. When they reached the house, Calder stopped at the porch. The horse did too, turning his head toward him. Neither spoke, yet neither needed to. For the first time since arriving, Calder felt something shift inside him. A stillness that wasn't emptiness, a peace that didn't depend on safety. He understood now he hadn't stayed at Dorn Mesa out of curiosity or stubborn pride. He had stayed because this land carried a legacy of courage, of silence, of creatures who couldn't speak for themselves, but deserved protection all the same. The wind rustled through the dry grass, and in the dim light, Iron Ghost bowed his head once before walking off into the darkness beyond the fence. Calder watched until the sound of hooves faded into the night. He turned, leaned against the porch post, and smiled faintly. The desert stretched quiet and endless before him. But for the first time, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive, with memory, with purpose, with ghosts that had found a friend to carry on their story. For days, peace hung over Dorn Mesa like a fragile truce. The wind softened. The nights grew calm. Calder had begun to believe that maybe, just maybe, he and Iron Ghost had found a rhythm and unspoken balance between man and beast, between the living and the ghosts that still walked this land. Every morning, he'd fix a new section of fence brew coffee on the porch and watch Iron Ghost standing on the ridge above the ranch. The horse's silhouette, sharp against the red horizon, had become part of the landscape, a spirit watching over the mesa. At night, the only sounds were the low hum of crickets and the sigh of the wind through dry grass. It was the kind of quiet that invited trust. And yet, Calder's instincts refused to rest. A man who's lived long enough on the outskirts of civilization learns that calm never lasts. It's only the breath before the storm. That afternoon, as the sunlight turned copper and long shadows stretched across the yard, he heard the distant growl of engines. Low, heavy mechanical. Not from the highway. Not passing through. Coming straight for Dorn Mesa. The red dust rose before the trucks appeared. 3 black pickups crawled along the dirt road like beetles, the afternoon sun glinting off their windshields. Calder stood on the porch, coffee cup in hand, watching. No markings, no county insignia. But the lead vehicle carried a whip antenna and a roof-mounted radio law enforcement equipment. When the engines cut off, the silence that followed was worse. Doors opened. Boots crunched on gravel. The first man to step out was broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, and heavy with the kind of authority that doesn't need a badge to prove itself. Sheriff Dale Huxley. He wore a gray shirt tucked into pressed jeans, a silver-banded hat, and a holster that looked more for habit than need. His eyes were the color of old steel, sharp, cold, and impatient. Behind him came Deputy Reeves, young and tense, his eyes darting everywhere but at his boss. Then Caldwell, older, slower, one hand resting casually but not carelessly on the butt of his pistol. Calder didn't move from the porch. He leaned against a post, calm but alert. Huxley smiled, a thin slice of charm without warmth. "Afternoon, Mr. Reed," he called. "Heard you bought this place for $50. Hell of a deal." Calder took a slow sip of his coffee before replying. "I paid what they asked," he said. The land didn't argue. The sheriff chuckled, but his eyes didn't. Huxley took a few steps forward, letting his boots scrape deliberately against the dirt. He looked around at the house, the fences, the barn. His gaze lingered longest on the corral. "Old man Dorn used to talk a lot of nonsense," he said finally. "Said people were stealing wild horses. Got himself spooked. Paranoid. Sad, really. Toward the end, he was seeing things that weren't there." Calder set his cup down on the railing, keeping his voice even. Maybe he was confused, or maybe he just saw things other folks were too scared to admit. The wind dropped. The flag on the gate went still. Huxley's smile faded. "I hope you don't catch a sickness, son," he said quietly. "Out here, men who see too much tend to have accidents." Calder didn't blink. "I see clearer than you think, Sheriff." For a long moment, they just stared at each other, predator and prey, though it wasn't clear which was which. Behind Huxley, Reeves shifted uneasily. Caldwell spat into the dirt and glanced away. Huxley finally broke the silence with a slow nod, feigning politeness. "Well, then," he said, "you enjoy your peace and quiet, Mr. Reed. Be a shame if it didn't last." He turned to leave, but stopped when the sound hit them, a deep, echoing cry that rolled through the valley like thunder. A horse's whinny, sharp and fierce, coming from behind the barn. Reeves flinched. Caldwell's hand dropped instinctively toward his gun. Then the world exploded in motion. Iron Ghost burst from behind the corral, hooves tearing the ground open, mane flashing silver in the light. Dust rose in a storm around him as he charged into the yard, not at anyone, but close enough to make every man step back. "Easy," Huxley barked, raising a hand. "It's just a damn horse." The stallion wasn't listening. He circled wide, massive, and fast, muscles rippling beneath the gray sheen of his coat. Each strike of his hooves sounded like thunder, the air filled with the sharp scent of sweat and dust. Calder didn't move. He just watched from the porch, silent and steady. Iron Ghost wasn't attacking. He was claiming space, defining the line between what belonged here and what didn't. Reeves muttered, "Jesus Christ," and stumbled back a step. Even Caldwell looked uneasy now, his hand frozen halfway to his gun belt. The stallion came to a halt in the middle of the yard, chest heaving, nostrils flared. He turned his head toward the sheriff. The look that passed between them wasn't animal and man. It was challenge and warning, wordless and absolute. "You don't belong here." For the first time, Huxley's jaw tightened. He held the horse's gaze for several seconds, then turned sharply, muttering something Calder couldn't hear. The message was clear enough. Huxley climbed into his truck, slamming the door with more force than necessary. He rolled the window down halfway, face shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. "Wild horses are federal property, Mr. Reed," he said, his voice cool but sharp. "Keeping one on private land's a crime." "You know that." Calder folded his arms. "Then tell the feds to come and get him," he said evenly. "See how that goes." A thin, humorless smile crept across Huxley's face. "Next time I come back," he said, "that animal better be gone. Or maybe you will be. Either way works for me." Reeves avoided Calder's eyes, guilt flickering across his face. Caldwell turned on the headlights, and the beams cut through the dust like searchlights. Engines roared to life. As the trucks turned, the dry wind carried their noise across the mesa, a sound that didn't fade so much as it fled. Iron Ghost stood firm in the yard, his body still, his breath loud and steady. His golden eyes followed the convoy until it disappeared beyond the ridge. Only then did he lower his head and exhale a long, slow breath that seemed to shake the ground itself. The gate rattled as the wind rose again, the clink of its chain echoing in the silence that followed. Calder stayed on the porch, Yum's crossed eyes fixed on the trail of dust settling in the distance. Iron Ghost turned, stepping toward him through the fading light. He stopped a few paces away, their eyes meeting across the yard. No words were needed. Both understood what had just happened. The peace had ended. The line had been drawn. The fight Silas Dorn had begun, the fight that had cost him his life, had found its next heir. Calder gave a slow nod. The stallion's ears flicked forward, his breath rising like mist in the cooling air. Somewhere beyond the mesa, thunder grumbled faintly, or maybe it was only the wind moving through the canyons. Either way, it carried the same message: the storm was coming. 3 nights passed after Huxley's visit, and Dorn Mesa sank into a silence so complete it felt almost sacred. The wind drifted softly through the cracked shingles, brushing over the wooden porch like a whisper. Crickets sang somewhere in the distance, their rhythm joining the deep, steady sound of Iron Ghost breathing beneath the eaves. Inside, Calder sat at the table under the dim glow of a lantern, his notebook open beside the laptop. He wrote quietly, coordinates for Ghost Hollow notes on the herd, a checklist of backup drives and hidden caches. His handwriting was calm, deliberate, though every line carried the weight of preparation. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight, 11:48. Calder rubbed his eyes, blew out the lamp, and lay back on the narrow bed. The air was cool, laced with the smell of dry earth and faint smoke from the old wood stove. His mind flickered with stray thoughts: the sheriff's threat, the files in his pack, the horses hidden deep in the canyon. Then came the one thought that lulled him to the edge of sleep: maybe they've given up. Maybe he only meant to scare me. But Dorn Mesa was not a place built for peace. and peace like light never lasted long in the dark. The scream of a horse tore through the night. It wasn't distant. It wasn't wild. It was sharp, furious, alive, and it vibrated through Calder's chest like thunder. He bolted upright, heart slamming against his ribs. Iron Ghost never called out without cause. Calder grabbed the revolver from the nightstand and lunged toward the window. Outside, the darkness was thick, the stars swallowed by dust. Then a flicker. Far off near the corral, a cluster of lights blinked once and vanished. Truck headlights switched off in unison. But their silhouettes were still there, 3 vehicles, black shapes against the blood-red dirt. Figures moved among them, slow and deliberate. He could hear faint metallic clinks, the shuffle of boots, and then the slosh of liquid. Gasoline. Calder's stomach tightened. He fumbled for his phone and hit 911. "This is Joe Everett." He caught himself forcing his voice steady. "This is Calder Reed at Dorn Mesa Ranch. Armed men on property." The line hissed with static. Then when he said the word Huxley, the connection snapped. The screen went black. Dead line. He cursed under his breath, tossing the useless phone onto the table. A sudden glare lit the window, orange, pulsing alive. He turned and through the smoke-streaked glass saw the first flames crawling up the side of the barn. The smell hit next acrid chemical choking. Gasoline and burning wood. They weren't just here to scare him. They were here to erase everything, him, the files, the evidence. Footsteps pounded outside, then the sharp crash of breaking glass. Someone shouted from the front yard, voice thick with malice. "Come out, ranch boy. Let's finish what Dorn started." Calder ducked low, pulse racing, every sense sharpened. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more, spreading out, flanking the house. He sprinted to the desk, sweeping Silas's documents into his old canvas pack. The notebooks, photos, memory cards, hard drives, every scrap of paper he'd touched since arriving. He shoved the laptop on top, zipped the pack tight, and slung it over his shoulder. A photo frame fell from the wall as he turned Silas Dorn standing with a horse that could only have been Iron Ghost years younger. The glass shattered across the floor. From outside came another sound, hooves pounding the ground, the kind that made the earth shake. Iron Ghost was calling again, louder now, urgent and wild. The warning had turned into a command. The wind shifted and the flames followed. They leapt from the barn to the dry grass, racing toward the house with hungry speed. The porch roof caught first a dull crack, then a roar as the old pine boards ignited. The walls flickered gold, the heat pulsing through the windows. Calder moved to the back door, coughing as smoke curled through the hall. He kicked it open, and a wave of heat and ash hit him square in the face. Out of the haze came movement, the glint of eyes, the shimmer of silver fur. Iron Ghost emerged through the smoke, his mane whipping in the firelight, his chest streaked with soot. The horse's nostrils flared breath, coming fast but steady. Calder stepped forward and laid a hand against the stallion's neck, the first touch since they met. The skin beneath his palm was hot, alive, trembling with power. "Easy, boy," he whispered, his voice rough. "We're leaving." From the front of the house came another shout. "He's inside, burn it down." Then the whoosh of a bottle breaking and fire exploded across the porch. Flames surged through the windows, swallowing the furniture, crawling across the ceiling. Calder crouched low, pulling his bandana over his mouth. He gripped the pack straps and moved along the outer wall, keeping to the shadows. Iron Ghost followed close, each step measured precise, as if he understood the plan. Gunfire cracked 2-3 shots. Splinters sprayed from the wall near his head. Calder ducked and rolled behind the last section of fencing hammering. He spotted the narrow ravine that cut behind the ranch, the same dry creek bed that ran toward the north ridge. Their escape. "Go," he hissed. Iron Ghost reared muscles coiled and launched forward. Calder sprinted after him, lungs burning, the sound of gunfire fading behind. A final explosion shook the ground, the propane tanks by the porch going up in a ball of flame. The old ranch house groaned to timbers, collapsing inward, sending sparks into the sky like dying stars. By the time the men realized they were gone, Dorn Mesa was already burning itself to ash. Half an hour later, Calder stood on the ridge above the valley chest, heaving. The pack was still on his back, heavy but intact. Below him, the ranch was a storm of fire, red and orange waves crashing against the night. The heat rose even from this distance. The wind carried embers into the sky, spinning them upward until they vanished among the stars. He watched in silence. Beside him, Iron Ghost stood tall, head-lifted eyes reflecting the inferno. In that molten glow, his coat looked forged from smoke and steel. The last remnants of Silas Dorn's world, the home, the evidence the man's memories were being devoured. But Calder knew better. The truth wasn't in the walls. It was in his pack. It was in the horse that had refused to forget. "They think they burned the truth," he said quietly. "They only lit it brighter." Iron Ghost pawed the dirt breath, streaming like vapor in the cold air. Then he turned his head north, toward the canyons, toward Ghost Hollow. The message was clear. Calder tightened the straps of his pack. "All right," he murmured. "Lead the way." They descended into darkness as the last beam of the house collapsed behind them with a sound like thunder. The sky over Dorn Mesa glowed red, not dawn, not sunset, but the death of something old. They walked through the night without a word. The air grew colder, carrying the smell of smoke and charred wood. Ash drifted down like strange gray snow, coating the trail that wound toward the hills. Iron Ghost walked beside him, unbridled, and free their steps in rhythm. Every now and then, Calder reached out to brush his hand against the horse's neck, a silent reassurance, a vow. No fear left now, only resolve. Each footstep pressed deep into the dry earth, leaving tracks that the wind could not erase. Behind them, Dorn Mesa burned like a fallen star. Ahead lay nothing but shadow and the faint gleam of hope hidden somewhere within it. When they reached the midpoint of the hill, Calder stopped and turned back one last time. The valley glowed faintly below the fire, dimming to embers. It was gone, everything. But what mattered? He looked at the horse beside him, his voice low and certain. "You and me now, Ghost," he said. "Until it's done." Iron Ghost lifted his head, the gold in his eyes, catching what little moonlight remained. He gave a low rumble of agreement, something between a breath and a vow. Together they climbed higher, their shadows merging against the northern skyline, two figures swallowed by darkness, but moving toward the same light, and the kind that even fire couldn't destroy. The first dawn after the fire broke over the desert like a quiet confession. The horizon still smelled of smoke, faint and bitter. But the sky above Ghost Hollow was clean, a hard, clear blue, untouched by ash. Calder and Iron Ghost reached the canyon at sunrise. The place was exactly as Silas Dorn had described in his notes, a hidden basin sealed by cliffs of red stone, open only through a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a horse to pass. A spring bubbled from the rock wall, spilling into a shallow pool before winding away through the grass. The herd was still there, 12 mustangs, 3 of them young foals grazing in the dew. They lifted their heads as Calder entered ears, flicking muscles tense. But when Iron Ghost stepped forward, they relaxed. He was one of them, their leader. Their proof that the world beyond the rocks still existed. Calder dropped his pack and got to work. He strung a tarp between two dead trees for shade, built a fire pit with flat stones, and carved out a small cistern in the streambed to store water. His meals were simple dried rations from the bag wild berries the occasional fish caught from the creek. The first few nights, he barely slept. Every crack of twig or rustle of leaves pulled him upright with his hand on the gun. But Iron Ghost always stood near the canyon entrance, motionless, watching the world outside while the others slept. For the first time in years, Calder felt a strange peace. He had lost everything that could burn, yet somehow what remained was everything that mattered. 3 days later, Iron Ghost woke him before dawn. The stallion stamped the ground, snorting toward the ridge. Calder followed the chill of morning air cutting through his shirt. They moved east up a slope where the red dust still carried the imprint of tires. The marks were fresh. At the boundary fence, Calder saw the cut clean, deliberate. Strands of barbed wire dangled loose with their ends blackened with oil. Nearby lay a mound of straw damp and reeking of gasoline. A trap. Something used to lure wild horses close enough for easy capture. Then Iron Ghost snorted and pawed at something half buried near the tracks. Calder crouched and brushed away the dirt. A leather wallet. Inside was an ID card, Rick Dunley, one of the truck drivers from Silas's old photographs. He snapped pictures of everything: the fence, the straw, the wallet, noting the GPS coordinates before sealing the evidence in a tin box. Iron Ghost watched him quietly, tail flicking. "Good eye, partner," Calder murmured. "You remember them, don't you?" The stallion didn't move, but his ears twitched forward. He wasn't just a survivor. He was a witness. That night, Calder unpacked Silas Dorn's old equipment. 2 motion-triggered trail cameras, dented but functional. A few spare batteries, a tangle of wires, and an ancient field laptop that still booted when coaxed. Over the next 2 days, he rigged 8 cameras around the canyon and along the ridges leading to the open plains. Each one faced a known access route, trails Silas had marked on his maps, where the thieves once moved horses under cover of darkness. Every evening, Calder hiked out to check the memory cards, downloading the footage into his computer, labeling each clip by time and location. It was on the 7th night that the truth appeared. He sat by the campfire, the soft glow of the laptop illuminating his face as he watched the images frame by frame. A truck, lights off, license plates mismatched and fake. Then men, half a dozen of them, driving tame horses to corral a wild herd. They moved fast, efficient, practiced, and then the final frame froze. Calder cold. Sheriff Dale Huxley, standing in the beam of a flashlight, gesturing toward the trucks. Beside him, unmistakable, was Deputy Reeves. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Calder stared at the screen until his knuckles went white. Silas Dorn hadn't been paranoid. He had been right. The men who killed him had been running a full-scale trafficking ring under the protection of the law. Iron Ghost shifted behind him, snorting softly, as if sensing the tension. Calder reached out, resting a hand on the horse's shoulder. "We've got them now, Ghost," he said quietly. "We just have to make the world see." The days that followed blurred into long hours of work. Each night, Calder wrote by flashlight in his journal, logging every discovery with military precision. Dates, faces, license plates, vehicle descriptions. He cross-referenced them with Silas Dorn's old photographs, building a timeline that connected 3 years of disappearances. When it rained, he wrapped the memory cards in plastic and buried duplicates beneath the flat rock beside the stream. Insurance. For when not, if they came again. Iron Ghost often lay near him during these long nights, eyes half closed, body still but alert. Sometimes Calder spoke aloud to him, his voice low and steady. "If I don't make it," he said once, "you'll know where to find it, won't you?" The stallion exhaled sharply, ears flicking toward him, an answer in its own way. The fear was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the fear of dying. It was the fear of failing the ones who couldn't speak for themselves. On the 14th day, Calder decided it was time. He packed lightly just the essentials, the laptop, the memory cards, the journals, and a few photographs of Silas Dorn. Before leaving, he stood beside Iron Ghost in the morning light. The horse's coat shimmered silver under the sun. Calder ran a hand along his neck. "Keep them safe, partner," he said. Iron Ghost answered with a low rumble, stepping aside to block the canyon's entrance, as if he understood the risk. Calder smiled faintly. "I'll be back." Then he turned and began the long walk to Red Mesa, a small town nearly 10 miles north outside of San Cielo County, where Huxley's badge held no power. By noon, heat shimmered off the asphalt. Calder's boots were coated in dust by the time he reached the library, a squat brick building with a single flickering neon sign. Inside, the air smelled of paper and desert rain. He sat at a public computer, heart pounding, as he connected to a hidden network Silas had once used. He uploaded everything, photos, videos, documents, to a secure cloud server. Then he drafted a message addressed to Federal Bureau of Investigation, Environmental Crimes Division, U.S. Department of the Interior, CNN Associated Press, Denver Post 3, Wild Horse Preservation Foundations. The subject line read, "Proof of organized wild horse theft and federal corruption. The Silas Dorn investigation." He hit send. Then, as backup, he printed several copies of the key files, sealed them in an envelope, and mailed them from the post office across the street. When he stepped outside, the desert wind hit him full in the face, dry, hot, electric. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the real fight had just begun. By the next morning, the world was on fire, not with gasoline, but with truth. Social media exploded. Clips from Calder's footage flooded every major platform, the trucks, the corrals, the nighttime captures. Hashtag Wild Horse Justice climbed to the top of national trends. Cable networks ran the story under bold headlines: "Cowboy exposes wild horse theft ring, $2 million operation uncovered." The footage of Sheriff Huxley directing the capture played on loop. His name became a curse in every state where wild horses still ran free. Volunteers across New Mexico and Arizona began patrolling Bureau of Land Management lands, forming citizen watches to protect the herds. FBI agents descended on San Cielo, bypassing the local sheriff's department entirely. In Ghost Hollow, Calder sat by the radio listening to the reports through the static. A woman's voice announced federal authorities confirmed the authenticity of the files. The whistleblower remains unidentified. Calder smiled. He reached over and brushed the side of Iron Ghost's neck. "Good," he whispered. "Let them think it's just a ghost." 3 days later, the inevitable headline arrived. Sheriff Dale Huxley arrested. 16 others charged in wild horse trafficking scandal. The radio crackled with updates. Huxley had been taken from his home in handcuffs. 2 deputies, 3 trucking company owners, and a regional BLM official were among those detained. The stolen horses had been traced to slaughter lines in Canada and Mexico. Federal prosecutors called it the largest wild horse corruption case in the West in 30 years. Calder listened without expression, though his hand tightened unconsciously around the cup of coffee. The announcer continued. When asked for comment, Sheriff Huxley said only, "You can't tame the wild." Calder turned toward the mouth of the canyon. Iron Ghost stood there framed in sunlight, his silver mane rippling like wind-blown smoke. He was beautiful, untamed, unbroken, everything Huxley could never understand. Calder smiled, voice low but steady. "No sheriff," he said, "but it can damn sure remember who tried." The wind shifted, carrying his words across the red cliffs of Ghost Hollow. Somewhere in that sound, it almost felt like Silas Dorn was laughing, the kind of quiet laughter that comes when justice finally breathes again. 2 weeks after Huxley's arrest, Calder Reed returned to Dorn Mesa. What greeted him wasn't the land he remembered, but the hollow skeleton of it, a wide basin of blackened soil and twisted metal, where Silas Dorn's house once stood proud against the wind. The air still smelled faintly of ash, though the flames had long died. The wind rolled through like nothing had changed, carrying with it the dry whisper of sage and smoke. Calder walked slowly across the ruins. His boots sank into the gray dust with each step, every footprint leaving a mark that looked more like memory than motion. Iron nails, warped beams, a melted horseshoe, all the relics of a place that once held a man's purpose. Near the barn's remains, faint hoofprints were pressed deep into the earth. Iron Ghost's marks. They looked recent, as though the stallion had circled the site after the fire, a vigil or perhaps a farewell. Down the hill, a row of federal vehicles gleamed beneath the sun. Portable tents, yellow tape, and the hum of radios surrounded the investigation camp. The words "Federal Investigation Zone" flapped from a strip of caution tape cutting across what used to be the front gate. In the middle of the scorched yard, an American flag stood half torn, its corner burned away, but still waving stubbornly in the wind. It wasn't triumph, Calder thought. It was apology. A voice called from behind him. "Mr. Reed." He turned. The woman walking toward him wore a dark field jacket with a Department of the Interior patch on her sleeve. Her stride was steady, her expression calm, the kind of calm that came from seeing too much and flinching too little. "Agent Naomi Keller," she said, extending a hand. "We've been looking forward to meeting you." Calder hesitated only a moment before shaking it. The wind blew soot across his sleeve, dusting her badge. Keller's voice softened slightly. "You've done more than you realize. We recovered over 200 horses from that ring. At least 100 are alive today because of what you and Silas Dorn started." Calder's jaw tightened. He looked out across the wreckage, the barn, the stones, the shadow of what used to be home. "He did the work," he said quietly. "I just finished it." Keller studied him for a long second, then smiled, the kind that meant respect, not comfort. "Then maybe you should finish it all the way." Calder looked at her. "The department's establishing a permanent sanctuary here," she said. "A federal refuge, the Silas Dorn Wild Sanctuary. We'd like you to run it." The wind pressed between them, full of ghosts and choices. Calder glanced toward the horizon, the direction of Ghost Hollow, and there in the distance, a flash of silver moved across the ridge. Iron Ghost leading the herd through the morning light. He turned back. "The name stays Dorn," he said, "and Iron Ghost stays free. No tag, no fence, no brand. He's not to be owned." Keller nodded once. "Done." They shook hands again. This time the gesture carried weight. Spring came early to Dorn Mesa that year. Construction began in April. Crews and volunteers from all over the Southwest. They rebuilt the ranch house using Silas's old blueprints, each beam measured against his notes. The roof was steel now, fireproof, but the front porch was the same, wide-facing west, made for sitting and watching storms roll in. The barn rose again too, though its purpose changed. No longer a prison for captured Mustangs, it became a refuge, a rehabilitation shelter for the wounded and starved. A symbol that care and ownership were not the same thing. Calder was there for every nail and every board. He refused a title, but everyone deferred to him anyway. The entrance sign was carved in granite and placed at the main gate, Silas Dorn Wild Sanctuary, where the wind still runs free. Each morning, Calder rode an old ATV along the boundaries, checking fences, tracking herds, making sure no strangers lingered too close. Iron Ghost often appeared on the ridge above the valley, the sun catching his mane like quicksilver. To anyone else, he looked like legend made flesh. To Calder, he was the proof that freedom, real freedom, could survive anything. 3 years later, the sanctuary stretched across 15,000 acres of protected land. Grass had reclaimed the ash. The wind carried seeds instead of smoke. More than 50 wild horses roamed freely across the plain, 10 of them born right there in the valley where Silas once hid them from hunters. Biologists and volunteers came from across the country to learn the sanctuary's approach, a system that relied on patience and instinct rather than fences or whips. They called it the Reed method. Calder always laughed when he heard that. "It's not mine," he'd say. "It's theirs." Every morning before sunrise, he brewed coffee on the porch and watched Iron Ghost lead the herd across the basin. The light would hit the horses first, turning dust into gold, and for a few minutes, the whole valley looked like a living painting. The new house smelled of pine and smoke, but it was peaceful. Sometimes Calder sat at the rebuilt desk in the exact spot where Silas once worked and opened the window to let the wind through. It sounded the same as it always had, endless, restless, honest. The only voice that never lied. That evening, the wind turned red again. The kind of wind that carried sand from 100 miles away and painted the horizon in the color of rust and memory. Iron Ghost stood alone on the ridge above the valley, his mane tossing in the dusk. Calder stepped out onto the porch and leaned against the railing. The boards creaked beneath his weight, familiar and solid. He watched the stallion's silhouette against the dying light, the same horse that had once run through fire beside him. "$50 for a lifetime, boy," he murmured, a faint smile crossing his face. "Guess the land chose right." Iron Ghost lifted his head and gave a low, almost conversational whinny, a sound carried away by the wind. Then he turned slow and deliberate and trotted toward the waiting herd. The sound of hooves rolled through the valley like distant thunder. Dust lifted and shimmered in the red light, swirling around the horses as they moved. It wasn't noise. It was a song, the last song of the West, written in breath and motion, sung by creatures too wild to ever belong. Calder stayed there long after they disappeared behind the ridge. The wind tugged at his shirt, filled his lungs, and brushed his face like an old friend. When the sun finally sank behind the sandstone hills, the sky caught fire. Orange turned to crimson, then to a deep, bruised violet. The wind rose again, sweeping over the plains, lifting the dust into glowing spirals. Across the mesa, the herd broke into a run, Iron Ghost at the lead, his mane catching the last shards of light. Their silhouettes cut across the hills, merging with the sunset, becoming something more than horses, more than story. They became symbols of endurance, of freedom, of loyalty to a land that had tried to forget them. In that burning sky, Calder could almost hear Silas Dorn's voice, carried by the wind. "As long as they run free, we're never gone." He closed his eyes and let the wind pass through him. For the first time in years, there was no bitterness in the sound, only belonging. And when he opened his eyes again, he was smiling. Because he knew that the land had finally remembered its own promise. And both man and horse, wanderer and ghost, had found their way home.